Let's talk to begin with. Talk to me about the influence that dedolight has had on the industry. I'm sure you remember a time before dedolight was there and how difficult it was to get that precision. What would you say to that? What's the influence?
I've always thought of dedolights as an optical instrument. I don't think of them as lights. They're like a lens. They have the precision of a lens. They're developed and designed to have the same characteristics of a lens, whereas most lights are slopped together. Modern lights are not lights, they're really computers. And they emulate whatever you want them to emulate, including a flashing police light or disco light or campfire, which to me is, I've been doing this for over 50 years, and I can count on two hands the number of times I've used that. Dedo has built a work of art as far as an instrument's concerned, because it does the same repeatable event every time. I can count on it repeatably. I can't say that about any other light. I don't care who the manufacturer is. I don't care if it's a $20,000 or $30,000 light. It is a light that I know when I pull it out, it's going to do the exact same thing. As I've always said, my first meeting with Dedo was rather a cantankerous one, because Hollywood cameraman, so I asked him, I saw the lights in Las Vegas. It was his first showing of his lights in the United States. And I said, so where are the scrims? Because we were accustomed to having a red scrim be a stop of light, a green scrim being a half stop of light, and putting light where we could find a place for the light, and then scrimming it accordingly. And Dedo, in his inimitable way, said, a good cinematographer puts the light in the right place. And instead of making me angry, we've become friends for life, because he's right, because he has built a perfect instrument, and if you have the ability to put it in the right place, then there's nothing that's necessary. Of course, unfortunately, we're always in spaces that are not perfect, and we're having to contend with directors or actors or processes that force us to compromise, whether it's where you put the light or where you put the camera or what lenses you use. And so what is really important for me is that I have a camera that's a perfect box. I don't want it to have bells and whistles. I don't want it to be flashy. I just want it to be perfect. I want it to do the same thing over and over again. And the same thing with lights. Now, I grew up in Hollywood, so I've used Mole Richardson, used arc lamps until they were outlawed. But I'm accustomed to using the standard of the industry. But the tragedy for me was that they were in such high manufacturing production outcome that they were more inclined to get a light that was exactly the same color, a light that had the same reflector and the same Fresnel, and when the bulbs changing accordingly. But truthfully, there was really no formula involved in making sure that the light was collimated perfectly, so that when it fell on your subject, that you could count on that light being a perfect instrument from across the entire beam. I mean, I could put my hand up and go through the beam of light and see where there were pockets or holes where either the Fresnel was shadowing or the Fresnel, the bulb was actually making a shadow. And so for me, it was never perfect light. So I had to learn to use the light that I had. So when Dedo came up with his light, I was astonished, because in those days we didn't have small instruments. We had our smallest instrument was an Inky, which was still about this big, and whereas with the Dedo, the 100 or the 150, I could put them anywhere and hide them. I could put them behind a drape and rocket it across the room and get a four-stop, because the light was not. The problem with most of the lights is they were good for about 6 feet or 12 feet, and then they were no good anymore because they fell off dramatically. Whereas the Dedo light, because it was optically collimated light, it was a perfectly collimated light wherever it fell, where if you had it 20 feet away, you were going to have a perfect transference of that beam pattern at 20 feet. So suddenly I was able to key people with these tiny little instruments instead of hanging them from green beds or putting a light in the middle of my shot and trying to find a way of hiding it. And it was revolutionary for me. I was doing a project called, I think it was Quantum Leap. And we were constantly dealing with directors who wouldn't give us a place for our lighting. You know, you always hope that the director is going to give you, well, you can have this part of the room for the lights. Or, you know, I don't want to go that low. Well, because there's no ceiling. If I don't have a ceiling, I can put lights up there. But the newer directors, the younger directors, wanted low angles, so that meant that you had to have a ceiling. And they wanted to do 180s, 180 degree pans, or even further. And so suddenly you didn't have a perfect place for the light. So you either had to get the art department to build you something that looked like it was a part of the room that you could hide the light with, or you had to fight for your place. With a Dedo light, I didn't have to do that. I could let the director do whatever he wanted, and I was going to be able to find a place for that light. And as the lights progressed, we got rid of the arc lights, and we were starting to use HMIs, which I would never liked HMIs because they always had a green spike in them. And if you were lighting a fair-complected person or a blonde, you were going to have that green in that shot, and it would compromise the timing on every other shot. They would have to try to find a way of matching it to the shot where you were lighting with that green HMI. Well, when Dedo came out with his 400D, he didn't have the green spike. Suddenly I had a light that would replace an 1800 HMI, and it was half the size and with as much power as the 1800. So suddenly I was hanging lights off of cars for car insert work that would usually take my crew an hour to do, and now I was being able to do it in half the time. It just progressively got better. And the problem with like the 1800s is again they were the difference in using a scientific instrument and a shop tool, whereas most of the lights, all the area lights, all the Moll Richardson lights, were like a shop tool. They did not have the precision, whereas every light, I felt that with Dedo, I was getting the same pride in craftsmanship that I was trying to do myself as a cinematographer. And that excited me, that someone cared enough about what they were doing that it was making me look better. And so I became a convert. Wherever I could use Dedo lights, I would. And it was frustrating for rental houses because they didn't have them. But I was doing shows that had long enough runs where they would have to go out and buy the Dedo kits in order to get our business. And so you'll find Dedo lights in every one of the rental houses in town. But the exciting thing for me is it is, from my point of view, an optically perfect instrument, just like that camera is. And that's what I want. So if I want to mess it up or make it look however I want it. At least I'm starting with something that I'm convinced is, what would you call it, neutral or nodal, so that anything off kilter I could repeat again scientifically instead of just throwing gels up in front of it or a scrim up and seeing if I can match this instrument, this lighting instrument, in relation to another instrument from that is supposed to be exactly the same. All of the Dedo lights are exactly the same.
I think it's also worth mentioning that we talk about Dedo light. It's actually a system.
One of the biggest issues we have in filmmaking, and especially in Hollywood, is people get comfortable using what they're used to using. And they don't want to take risks, they don't want to take chances because you're dealing with something that's costing $100,000 or even $1 million a day. And so you're not willing to try new ventures. The best part and the worst part about the Dedo lights is that they are a system. And it's not a complicated system. It's like having different lenses for your camera or having different optical modifiers for your lenses. There is something for everything with a Dedo light. So you're not just getting the lighting instrument, you're getting everything, every kind of device that can modify and manipulate that device to be what you want it to be. For example, a tiny little instrument this big can be a huge softbox that's 10 to 12 feet wide. On Ray Donovan, we were using those on Ray Donovan, and it was remarkable, whereas we would have had to bounce into a card or to have had some big softbox that would have had the intensity to go through that diffusion. All we had to do was just use a small Dedo light and go into the silk or whatever device we wanted to use it in, and we were able to do it. And otherwise, when we were doing critical, this is very old school, old fashioned, where we were trying to do the shadow dye, which is very hard to do with a Mole-Richardson light because you have to get the controls so far away from the light to get a sharp shadow that you're almost in the frame. Well, with a Dedo light, you can literally take a barn door and make a hard cut of light across an actor's face. You can also make the light so tiny and collimated that you're only lighting one portion of a set. For example, if you have a painting that's across the room and you need to enhance that and you're on a real location so you can't hang something, you can take a Dedo light from across the room and pinpoint specifically that painting or a portion of that painting, and it will be accurate. And the yoke on the light is strong enough that it won't flop around, so that once you lock it down, it's not going to sag or it's not going to change. It's a system that's not, oh, we need this, oh, we need that, so we'll build something or we'll buy something from someone else that'll make it. Dedo is so exacting and autocratic in the way that he goes about everything that goes in front of his light that it works to your advantage instead of it being just a cheap pile of something that maybe will work 3 or 4 times and you have to go out and buy another one.
And it's also worth saying that people think of Dedo light, and a lot of people know the GLH4 or the original Dedo light, and they're not aware that there's many different Dedo lights. He makes dedicated soft boxes. He makes really tiny lights, even these days Leadzilla, which is very small and very useful depending what you're doing, because sometimes it's not about how much light, it's just the right amount of light.
When Dedo originally came out with his lights, the sensitivity of the film stock was such that we were accustomed to using large lights. We were used to using 10Ks, 5Ks, 2Ks if we could get close enough to a person, 1Ks to light walls and things like that, but seldom to light to key an actor because we needed the f-stop. Today, with the sensitivity of the sensors, we don't need the power anymore. What we need is small units, Personally, we need small units that can be battery operated because we don't need that big cable distribution we used to need, which I always used to say it was not about how long it took you to light, it was about how long it took you to lay the cable and to wrap the cable, because that was a part of the day. You know, if it took you an hour to lay out the distribution and then to wrap the distribution, that was an hour that was stolen from your day. And with Dedo's new lights, I mean, they're battery operated. They can be plugged into a wall, but it's an Edison plug that goes directly into a wall socket instead of having this big, long distribution system. And so you can get a very small light to go into a huge diffusion system, and it will give you the power that you need. Plus, it will do something that we always longed for, and that was that it wasn't about the softness of the light, but it was about the size of the light. We always wanted a light that would wrap around our subject. If the light is larger than the subject you're lighting, which is a formula for how car commercials are lit, if the light is larger than your subject, you'll get the soft transition in the light from the shadow side to the highlight side. And that is a giant gift. So here you have this small soft box, and it's perfectly soft, whereas before we would have had to bounced into a card or to have gotten the light much further back with a big diffuser, the silk, maybe 6x6, to do what you're doing with just this one tiny little light with a diffuser that's attached to the lights themselves. And that has been revolutionary. And it's funny because I think people, when they walk up and see Dedo's lights now, they look like toys because they're yellow and they're silver. And they literally, when you look at them, you think, well, this is not for me because it doesn't have the power that I need. But it not only has the power, it has that instrumentation that you need to carefully collimate and control the light to be where you exactly want it. And with the new ribbing that's inside the soft boxes, you can literally control the light with a lot of flags. There's not one flag here. And in the old days, we would have had at least 15 to 20 flags to control the light on the scene, if not more. Every light had to have a flag on it, if not a topper, it had to have a bottomer and the sides on them. So that's time that you required to have a grip to bring all those instruments in. It has to have a C-stand for every one of those flags, plus the flag itself. And that's time. Even if you have a fast crew, that's time. Well, with this, you just have the light. And so I contend that the things that are happening in Europe and in England, we haven't come close to getting to that point yet because we're still frightened. And we're trying to do it the old way, the old school way. But if we'd only give it a chance and try the new instruments and see what they can do for us, we wouldn't be using any of the things that we used to use. And the problem with most of the lights I see now that are being built, as I said, they're computers, so they're very expensive. And they have the same maladies that every computer has, that they can be finicky. And we're out in the rain and the cold and the dirt. You have to find something robust. And most of these lights can't survive for any length of time in the environments we go in. But the truth of the matter is, you can pull out the first generation 100 or 150, and it will still work as well as it did the day you bought it, and probably look just as good. And I suspect the new lights will have that same kind of longevity. So you're buying an investment. It's like when you buy a lens. You don't expect that lens to fail after a year or two. Well, Dedo lights don't fail. They just consistently do what you expect them to do. I've always contended that Dedo was a mad scientist. I always contend that he had that childlike innocence to explore, to try to discover. He was never going to be happy or content with what he did. I always say this: the thing that makes you good is also the thing that makes you bad. It's tough being someone that is intolerant of just getting by, because that means that you're never going to forgive, you're never going to forget, you're always going to continue to strive for perfection. The thing that I found with all the LEDs, I did a series called Elementary in New York. We were using LEDs, and the actors got to the point where they refused to be lit by an LED because it was hurting their eyes. And I would sit in front of the light and look at it, and I'd say, you know, this light is actually hurting my eyes. I can't figure it out. And I started discovering, as I'd read it with a color temperature meter, that there was this giant green spike in the light. And I asked Dedo about it, and he said, yes, there's a giant spike in virtually all the LEDs. And indeed, in some of the LEDs, there was a brainwave issue that could cause brain damage. And so when Dedo developed and released his lights, they don't have that same issue. So I could look into this light all day long. Here's the other interesting thing. About 6 months ago, I borrowed some Dedo lights to try at home. Just the DL7, or is that the DL7?
DLED7, yeah.
And the DL3?
DLED3, yes.
DLED3. And I wanted to do something. I always do this with sensors and with lights. They still haven't been turned off. They've been on the entire time. And I read them every week. The color temperature, they've not changed. Nothing has changed. They don't seize up. They don't get hot. They're cool to the touch. There's something metaphysical about this. There's something almost supernatural about these lights, in that they don't have a green spike like virtually all the other lights, LED lights, have. They're easy on the actor's eyes, which to me, if I said nothing else other than that, that would be a selling point. Because we contend with actors who are unaccustomed to any light because they come from the theater, or they're not accustomed to the big bright lights we used to use. And so we have to serve that master. And so you could have the most perfect light in the world, and if they can't look into it, then you're in trouble. I've been looking at this light for some time, and I don't have any issues with the light. I don't have to squint. The old actors, you always saw them, their head down, so the brow would furrow, and the key would be up a little bit so they could brow down with their heads and talk like this, and that was the way they protected their eyes. Well, I don't have to frown. I don't have to do anything. I can have the light dead in my eyes, and it's not an issue. So this is a person that has been on this journey for as long as I've been a cinematographer. He's been on this journey for finding something that bothered him in all of the instruments he was using when he was a cinematographer. He's not just a mad scientist, he's also a cinematographer. So he wanted something that would service him as well. And fortunately, he was asking the same questions we were all asking ourselves. And he was willing to find the answers. And we haven't even talked about the reflectors. We haven't even talked about the fact that you could take 4 reflectors and put them up in different portions of the room, take one light, and that 4 reflectors could literally light every portion of your scene. It's a more passive way of lighting, in a way that doesn't intrude on the actors, it doesn't intrude on the director. Indeed, it's almost an invisible source. And it does what a natural light does in a real environment. If you buy a Dedo light, you're not going to have to buy another one to replace it. that light's going to service you for the rest of your career. Just like the lenses, unless you drop your lens, it's going to service you for as long as you can run light through it. Same with the dedolight. Well, that's exciting to me. That means that every 6 months or a year, there's not going to be something new that I have to go out and buy because it's new and improved. All the other manufacturers are desperately trying to build new and improved. They're coming up with new software to try to make their light better than what it was. I don't find that with the dedolights. The dedolights are they're work of art, frankly. It is a work of art that is also a tool that I use to communicate what I do as a cinematographer.
You mentioned the reflectors. Obviously, you're speaking about Lightstream. How excited are you about Lightstream, and what would you think, how much influence is this going to have on the industry and cinematography moving forward?
Lightstream is an interesting and curious animal in that I think my generation of cinematographers are not going to get it as quickly as the young filmmakers are going to get it. Because we're so accustomed to doing things in a formulaic way that the people I see understanding Lightstream are the younger filmmakers that I talk to, because they don't know any better. So they get it much more quickly. And I'm still on a learning curve with it. I don't know all that I can do with it, but yet I know that when I'm in a tough situation where I'm in a place where I can't hang anything, and I can't get to the other side with a light that I really need, I know that I can do it with a Lightstream. And that, to me, is a giant leap in not just technology. It seems to me that the best ideas are the ideas that are simplistic. And why someone never thought of this before, I used to have front surface mirrors, and I never pulled walls and sets. Our directors would always want to get a lens on the camera, which meant we'd have to pull the lens. Well, I would put a front surface mirror up against the wall, and I would take the camera, point it into the mirror, and I would be able to use the proper lens and not have to pull the wall. And everybody used to think this was such magic. Well, this is now the same thing with light. Oh, I can't get the light there. What am I going to do? How am I going to get the light in that place? Well, you use the reflector. You can put the reflector there. You can put that virtually against the wall, and based upon the triangulation of the light, you can get it to come back and be a back cross for an actor where you would be, it would take you an hour to hang the light. And this way you just tape the reflector on the wall, and you take the light back off the set, and you got your back edge or your cross light or whatever you want to do.
What do you think it will take to really push dedolight forward in the USA? It's certainly known, it's made an impact, but it could make a much bigger impact. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I really do. I've thought a lot about this because I've been sort of a cult member of the Dedo clan for a long time. I think that it's going to take what happened in the 1960s in the era where I came up, and the old generation was dying out, and they couldn't change their ways. In my generation, we were literally going into real locations. We weren't on sound stages anymore. We were using smaller equipment. It's the new generation, the young generation, that's going to change all of that. I'm now teaching basic lighting at one of the film schools, and they get it quicker than if I talk to someone my age and try to convince them to do it. They'll get it quicker than that person will get. I mean, they might use the reflectors, or they might use the dedolights, but they'll probably use the airy lights quicker because it's an Aeroflex light. But the funny thing is, in the 1960s, nobody was using airy lights. They were really only used in Europe. And frankly, not even Aeroflex cameras were used in the 1960s in Hollywood. We were using Panavision and Mitchells. And it came, that new generation brought the Aeroflex with them. Now, I think the new generation is going to bring the dedolight. We just need to be in the classrooms to teach people that it's a no-brainer when you literally see this standing behind the other options. The light panels, all the other lighting instruments are buckets of light. This is not a bucket of light. This is a collimated light.
What would it be, a world without these lights? I'm sure it would be a lot more difficult and a lot more virtually impossible to get the precision and light exactly where you want it. You mentioned you can light up a painting in the background. You can light up any element of a scene. I've been involved in shoots where people have many dado lights positioned all over the place, spotted on every little bit that they can get to. Could it be done with other systems, or if it could be done, I imagine it would be a lot more difficult and a lot more time consuming, and probably not with as good results, I would have thought.
We used to try using small instruments, even when we were shooting black and white. We used to try to use small instruments, spotting them down to get them to throw the distance that we needed to get into the rooms on big sets, in the huge sets, 60-foot sets. And it never worked that well because they were not built to be an optically perfect collimated light. They were built to be a light that was always used in its flood position, never really to be used in its spot position. The only time you would spot was to get just a little bit more light for exposure. But you would never think a spot on a light would be the perfect place to spot a light to get the results you would need. You could spot a dado light in on an actor's face, and it would be as perfect as it is in its flood position. I've always contended that there is an optically perfect place in a light stream for a light to work accurately. There must be a formula for that. And in truth, if you use regular lights, that's a sloppy instrument. Now, if I had never seen a dado light, I wouldn't know any different. But having seen the dedolight and having worked with them for the number of years I've worked with them, I wrote the technical letter when I was on the technology committee at the Academy. I wrote the technical letter to persuade the technology committee to give Dedo the Oscar. And of course, then Dedo had to write his letter. But it was very interesting because nobody really wanted to know the difference. They just wanted to be safe and complacent. But now that dado lights have been in, there's enough of us that have used dado lights over the years, and especially filmmakers that are not in studio systems that have used the lights for many years, and people have seen their results and said, wow, that looks beautiful. How did they do that? That if you took the dado light away now, it would be like taking oxygen out of the room. I mean, if you only had 50% oxygen before and suddenly you get 100% oxygen, you know the difference. But if you took that 50% away, I would know the difference now because I have seen the power of these instruments. And it would be, first of all, I can't even imagine a world without dado lights.
You've been wonderful. You've answered all the questions. Is there anything else you would like to say? I'm handing it over to you for any comment that you want to add to what we'd said.
You know, we were talking about cameras before we started filming. And most of us that are cinematographers or photographers, and I was Ansel Adams' assistant for off and on for a year. And I knew Conrad Hall very, very well. And Conrad used to talk about what's for dessert. I want the candy. And Ansel had that same childlike obsession with something that was new, something that would help him to do something better than he had done before. And for me, I'm always looking for that turn in technology, that invention that will make what I'm doing that much more exciting, because it'll be less about the stuff and more about what's inside, about being able to be the interpreter that we all want to be. The digital cameras have certainly helped a lot, because, as Ansel always said, the image is created in the darkroom. And now that's what we do. We create the image in the darkroom. And with Dedo's lights, it allows us to be less about the stuff and more about the interpreter telling the story. We don't have to worry about, how am I going to get that light out of the shot? How am I going to get enough light in to the set to make it work? And how am I going to be unobtrusive to the actors? And so I'm like a child, excited and waiting for what's next for Dedo, because I never would have dreamed that this would have been the direction he would have taken. He's always taken small instruments and made them more powerful than the big instruments. And so I'm not, it's kind of like awe-inspiring to know what has happened, and exciting for me to know that still at 73 years old, he's still got quite a few things up his sleeve that he's developing that I think will make it very exciting to be a cinematographer in this generation.